The 90s. Such a weird time in history. You could probably say that about every decade in the last century, but the 90s, maybe due to its proximity to my time, feels a bit weirder in comparison to other decades. Following the collapse of the Soviet Union, the US was at its zenith, either politically, economically, or culturally. Disney and Nickelodeon ruled many a child's mind, McDonald's and fast food in general ruled many an adult's stomach, and Johnny Depp and Alicia Silverstone ruled everyone's hearts. Oh, and I'd hate to forget this small thing called the internet that became a worldwide phenomenon at the time. American culture was becoming the world's culture. And by extension, American cinema was becoming, more so than ever, the world's cinema. This meant that movies that shaped our collective mind were reflective of the hopes and fears of Americans at the time. The movie industry was arguably in a bit of a slump during the closing of the 80s. What started as the decade cementing the concept of the blockbuster with The Empire Strikes Back, E.T., Ghostbusters, and Back to the Future ended in a whimper, at least relatively speaking. Even the hits that were released in the late 80s, such as Die Hard or Akira,
Leave me alone!
now feel more in tune with what the 90s offered. Big action releases, gritty or otherwise edgy themes that didn't necessarily pander to the former decade's family first policy, and above all, experimentation made possible by the fact that movies were now more than ever easier to make, all thanks to advancements in CGI technology and the rise of independent studios. Couple that with outside influence from Hong Kong movies and the like, and you get everything from Pulp Fiction to Jurassic Park. This is why the movie I'm discussing today is so intriguing to me. It captures the climate around the 90s extremely well, but in a way that differs from most releases at the time. It is a much more intimate, low-profile story with everyday, flawed people in it. There's no personification or objectification of the conflict, no clear good or bad guy. Everyone has their own inner demons to deal with, and as such, we perceive the clashes and twists happening inside the characters. The human heart in conflict with itself, as George R. R. Martin likes to quote. What's Eating Gilbert Grape came out in 1993. But is set in the early 70s and takes place in Endora, Iowa, a small, quiet town next to the interstate where the Grape family resides. Gilbert Grape is a young man responsible for his family, and more specifically, his mentally disabled brother Arnie. As is the case with young people, Gilbert is always pondering the what-ifs in his life and wanting to act on them. What if he didn't have all these responsibilities? What if his family was different? What if he just up and left Endora one morning? The hand of fate intervenes in Gilbert's life, and he finally gets to answer all these burning questions. This is the general plot of the movie. Taken at face value, it's a classic coming-of-age story. There are hundreds, even thousands of these. But I can't help but feel there is more to this one, a simplicity that is layered at the same time. It evokes a period in America where times were shifting, and with them came a new way of life to trump the existing one, how different people reacted to that shift, and how you can see a parallel with 1990s America. You have sub-themes of the effects of a capitalist society on its people, individualism versus collectivism, and so many scenes with double meanings and dry humor. I could spend so much time analyzing this movie, but what the hell, let's just go for it. Welcome to the show.
Good? Not good corn.
The movie starts with a shot overlooking the road connecting Endora to the interstate. We hear Arnie excitedly awaiting the caravan of camper cars and Gilbert patiently awaiting Arnie, all the while concurring the caravaneers' decision to just pass by Endora instead of staying. This is already telling for a scene, but let's not get ahead of ourselves. Gilbert, as the narrator tells us about himself, his family, and town, Endora is given a very bleak description. It's a town on the sidelines of activity, a small dot in between big splotches. Its shaky existence is ever more questioned since the arrival of franchises by the interstate close to it. Endora finds itself in a spot many towns like it were going to face as a result of the natural progress of capitalism. Still, for now, Endora persists, and so does the Grape family. Speaking of, after Gilbert and Arnie, we meet the sisters, Ellen and Amy, younger and older respectively. Ellen is right in her teenager era, while Amy is the de facto mom of the family. As for the de jure mother, well, according to Gilbert, we don't get to see her at her best. She hasn't left the house since the Kennedy administration. That's 7 years. Why? Her husband hung himself in the basement one morning, that's why. You see, ever since that fateful day, the Grape family has never been the same. The change is very visible in Bonnie, the mother, but its intangible nature on the siblings' side doesn't make it any less real. Their responsibilities increase to the point of overload, and you can feel it. Apart from the common household duties they have to perform plus their mom, they have their brother Arnie to look out for. Arnie is a sweet boy, but the truth is, with every year he is a growing burden on the already overworked siblings. This means that they are bound to stay here to work and to provide for themselves, rendering any personal goals they might have completely meaningless. The effect this has on Gilbert will be seen throughout the movie. After family, we get to see the professional and romantic side of Gilbert's life. He works at the local convenience store, Lamson's, an expectedly failing business after the arrival of the supermarket Foodland. This theme of slow withering is a recurring image in the film. Another recurring image, this time in Gilbert's life, is that of his daily drive to work with Arnie in order to multitask working and watching him. This is often followed by the delivery trip over to Mrs. Craver's. I say delivery trip because Mrs. Betty Craver is the married woman Gilbert has been having an affair with for the past few months. There is some affection between the two, but their relationship doesn't really scream passion. It's more of a transaction than anything else. Betty gets to forget her failing marriage and age by adding some spice to her days, while Gilbert maintains some semblance of a personal life, allowing him to exist, if only for a few minutes, outside the role of the responsible brother. While we're on the subject of recurring images in the movie, here's another one concerning Arnie. Every few days, Arnie gets the urge to climb the town's water tower. This serves to show two things. One, the growing pain in the ass he's becoming, and two, the sad amount of entertainment this town is exposed to, stooping so low as to gather around the water tower as if a show is about to start. In any case, this antic of Arnie has some impact on the plot, but not until later in the movie. For now, we get glimpses of the person that's about to be the catalyst in Gilbert's change. But again, let's not get ahead of ourselves. The family is discussing the preparations for Arnie's birthday when Ellen brings up the fact that Gilbert isn't helping in any way. This brings up a fight since Gilbert feels his hands are already filled with working and watching over Arnie, even bathing him. This prompts Gilbert to leave, where he meets his friend Tucker and Bob and tell her to move so they can replace the flooring. And when Tucker asks for help in the basement, Gilbert shushes a once again chaotic Arnie, yelling,
Dad's in there! Ooh! Shh! Ooh! Dad's in there! Shh! Honey, shut up!
Le dije tenía que ser helado como el poto del kanji, y se la echó conmigo el ahueonao y como chuporraja le tiré una...
This family has a lot of taboos, and the wear and tear on them is increasingly showing. Hey, you know what we didn't have in far too long of a time? Arnie climbing the water tower again. Unfortunately, party pooper Ellen runs after him to stop him, hurting him in the process. How dare she be frustrated at her older brother, the harpy. Thankfully, Gilbert runs to the rescue. This scene might seem innocuous at first, but it highlights how important Arnie is to Gilbert despite his shenanigans, and also how the latter always has to be on his guard to keep him safe. That is draining. The next scene is even more symbolic. The minute he arrives home, Gilbert is immediately faced with a barrage of complaints by an equally stressed out Amy, with Arnie being his usual self and Ellen gracing our ears with a terrible din from her trumpet the whole time. Gilbert is understandably teetering on the edge at this point, and he lets Ellen know.
Watch out, watch out, watch out, watch out!
In order to decompress a bit, he visits the only good thing running around in his mind right now, Becky. In all his indecisive glory, he decides to creepily stare at her from behind some bushes. Thankfully, Mr. Craver blows his cover to remind him of their inevitable meeting. I wonder what that could be about. In any case, Becky beckons him over and the two start mingling with her grandmother. This conversation establishes the notion that Becky is the literal antithesis of Gilbert. She's a carefree, worldly kind of gal, while Gilbert sees himself more in her grandma, at least before she started tagging along with her granddaughter. The way she describes herself before that is uncomfortably like Gilbert is now, and it seems like Becky feels it. She suggests they do something, and while it is sad that Gilbert can hardly think of something, and Dora really doesn't help. They go for ice cream, and of course, they bump into Betty. Still, for now, things are okay. They share a nice moment, watching the sunset, having deep conversations about the sky. Then, Gilbert's spidey senses kick in. Duty calls. This time, however, he won't let his obligation ruin his vibe. He speedruns bathing Arnie for a few more moments of peace with Becky. That, as we'll soon learn, was a big mistake. For now, though, it's all Becky. The two talk about their lives. Her antithesis status is even more pushed, and we see the downtrodden Gilbert when he's faced with the reality of the life he leads. He's still wanting to hide it from people, but there is some part of him that sees it from an outsider view. The evening ends, and it's clear Gilbert likes Becky a lot. She expectantly notices. The next morning, as Gilbert is going through his routine in the bathroom, he hears something. Turns, and Arnie spent the whole night Nemo style, making him scared shitless of the water. From this point on, he'll refuse to bathe or swim, and it's all Gilbert's fault. Nice. Speaking of headache, Thursday comes, and with it the Craver delivery. Betty has the brilliant idea to trick Gilbert into calling her husband while she goes down on him as an anniversary gift. And here I thought the residents of this town were lacking in action. Mrs. Craver is clearly craving, pun intended, any out from her routine existence. All excitement is a welcome escape. Gilbert's mind is elsewhere, though, and the two have a falling out over this. He decides to get it over with and actually visit Mr. Craver. The next sequence of events is surprisingly very symbolic. If I had to pick one sequence to convey the energy of this movie, this would be it. Gilbert arrives at Ken Craver's office, and the confrontation he's been dreading is afoot.
Kevin Ty
Can go from simpleton to a fucking Bond villain in seconds. The dialogue is so well written, even after it is revealed that Mr. Craver only wanted to inquire about the Grape family's insurance plan. We're not so sure about his motives for asking that question. Is he looking to cash in on Gilbert or alluding to what he's about to do to him? Maybe enjoying the tension before he commits his act. Add to that the ticking clock and the sudden phone call.
Nice.
Of course, after the caller is revealed to be Betty, we get Simpleton Ken back. The hand of fate makes it that Gilbert has to give him a ride, and when they arrive, we find Betty crying her actions out, probably disillusioned at this point. The house burns because of her, and her husband runs to her aid. He's expectedly unable to figure out what's going on, let alone appease his wife, who runs to her uninterested and puzzled lover. When he asks her why she chose him, she says,
Yeah, look, real water, boys. Okay, so I don't give everything.
Because
I give you all I have. But
I knew you'd always be there. Because I knew you'd never leave.
double meanings, double meanings. Ken Craver dies the next day, drowned in his kiddie pool. Just like we silently accused him of wanting to kill Gilbert, only for him to warn him about the unexpected events of life, the town accuses Betty of killing her husband when, in truth, his earlier speech was right on the money. Only not for his potential client. As Bob explained, Mr. Craver simply died of a sudden heart attack. Ken Craver's death is important in many ways. It reminds Gilbert of how fleeting life can be, and the importance of seizing the day. He's also an abstract vision of what Gilbert could become should he remain the way he is. After the whole ordeal, Gilbert reunites with Becky. At this stage, he's very conflicted, and an opportunity presents itself to him. Becky's grandma asks him for help fixing the truck, and while we aren't explicitly told, it's clear that Gilbert decided to do the selfish thing and sabotage the repairs so he could spend more time with Becky. This is obviously uncool, but we can at least understand his plight. For Becky to leave right now would be a crushing blow to Gilbert. She's just about the only beacon of hope he has left, and though that is not her responsibility, nor does it excuse Gilbert's actions, it is how he feels.
Gilbert, listen, thanks anyway.
No problem.
They hang around with Arnie, having a swell time. When Gilbert is with Becky, he is bolder, happier, more carefree. She asks him questions about himself he never wondered about. His answers reveal his attention was always on his family. The more he ponders, the more he is lost in his thoughts until... Hey, you didn't think Arnie would let him have this one, did you? Of course not. It's right about time he climbed the fucking water tower again. This instance of this suicidal ritual, however, is by far the most significant in this movie. Arnie is promptly arrested. By the way, I'm not sure, but that does seem a little too harsh of a decision, especially considering they could have just restrained the access to the tower, but oh well. He is arrested all the same and is sent to spend the night in jail. The family is at a loss for solutions on how to get him back. As much as Gilbert tries, the police won't budge. Bonnie Grape, however, disagrees. She decides, for the first time in 6 years, to leave the house. For a decision like that, she will not return without her son. And well, her wish is met, but not before the townsfolk see her. I have been shitting on the residents of Andorra, and I still think it's very rude for them to stare, laugh, and take fucking pictures, but Bonnie Grape is definitely quite the sight to behold. A big shock, if I may be so bold myself. The shot on the return trip is comical, but it also speaks volumes on the unbalanced state of this family. The somber faces return home, and we see the Grapes at their lowest point so far. As if Gilbert wasn't conflicted enough, he and Becky share their first kiss, right after he dismisses her wishing to see his mother, asking her instead what her next destination is. Clearly, his mind is set elsewhere. A storm is forming in this guy's heart, and you can definitely feel it. The next scene is another favorite of mine. The movie masters the art of conveying profound messages with morbid comedy. While attending Ken Craver's funeral, with all the context we have of Gilbert's state of mind and his rocky affair with the deceased's wife, the Burger Barn Trucks arrives in town, and Arnie, who by the way I have no idea what the fuck he's doing there, heralds their arrival gleefully to the attendees with some of his signature primal screams. All the while we see Tucker giving a look of approval at the sight of the coming cortege. Afterwards at the store, Betty visits Gilbert one last time, and how fitting for this to be the only time she's completely earnest with him. It's clear that she's made her peace with her reality, and now sees Gilbert in a much more objective lens. She still likes him, of course, but his unfortunate circumstances are clear to her now. She leaves him with some positive words, highlighting his good core, but also with some that are stinging but all too real. Just like in Gilbert's mind, as she's about to leave, Becky barges in. She tells her he's all hers and is gone. This gives some closure to Gilbert. He admits he'll miss her, but at least he still has Becky, right? Right? It's raining in Andorra. I wonder if it's the only place where the weather is changing. As he's unloading Becky's groceries, Gilbert suddenly hears the roar of an engine. Becky's grandma's car engine. This can only mean one thing, and his face changes to the realization of that fact. He immediately clutches onto Becky, hugging her. When the engine dies, his face finds color again. Becky will stay. For now. Sure enough, the relief doesn't last for long, as he's celebrating Burger Barn's opening day, a scene, by the way, with all the morbid humor I love about this movie. Becky comes to inform Gilbert of her departure. The truck got fixed after all, and there's nothing keeping her here now, not even Gilbert. At her reveal of the news, the party comes alive, just to spite Gilbert a bit more. His mood switches from joyful to doomful in mere seconds, but he refuses to acknowledge the feeling, maybe because of his pride, but mostly due to his self-erasing nature. He thinks it would be selfish of him to say he wants her to stay, which is half true, it is, but there's nothing wrong with him being transparent about his feelings. The toxicity would have begun if he had manipulated her into staying, or, say, sabotaged her grandma's repairs. In any case, this puts a sour note on the relationship, and Becky leaves, frustrated at his vagueness. The show must go on, so Gilbert has to chase his brother down to bathe him for his birthday. This leads to Arnie bumping into Amy, who was coincidentally holding his birthday cake. The cake falling is a bummer in any context, but with all of what the family has been going through, it feels like a tragedy, and they react to it as such. Gilbert now has to shop for a cake at the enemy's nest, Foodland. This motherfucker cannot catch a break because on his exit, he runs into none other than Mr. Lamson, his boss, who gives him this hurt puppy look. It's just, unbearable. We get this nice symbolism for things about to happen, and the next shot shows the trigger for those very things. Gilbert chases Arnie after he ate the replacement cake they bought for him, and forces him to shower when he catches him. When his brother doesn't comply, Gilbert unleashes all the resentment he's been holding throughout the film and beats Arnie up, leaving the house right after doing so. As much as he's been unbearable for some time now, seeing Arnie's bleeding face with an equally hurt and shocked look in his eye is nothing short of heartbreaking. He too sets off into the night toward God knows where. Gilbert's destination, on the other hand, is revealed immediately. He's on his way to leave Endora for good, but after some deliberation, opts to visit Becky instead. Maybe one more stop before taking off. Coincidentally, or perhaps not so much so, Arnie chooses to go there as well. Even arriving before his brother, when he's about to see Becky, Gilbert finds her playing in the lake with Arnie, even getting him over his recent fear of water. The sisters finally arrive to pick him up just as Becky is about to get him home, and Gilbert, decidedly ashamed of his actions, retreats to the bushes once again to avoid being seen. But once again, Becky catches him nonetheless. He is right about done with it all, but her words, as they always do, have a soothing effect on him. For the first time in the movie, we see Gilbert express something other than apathy or anger. We see him cry and accept his state of mind. He and Becky lie down in the grass just like they did before, but this time he's an open book, venting to a recipient who he knows cares about him. She lets him externalize what ails him, trying to assign blame on the cause of his situation. But Gilbert sees things clearly now. Yes, everyone had their part to play, but to assign blame would be to ignore the fact that sometimes life just happens. That to make peace with it is the only way one can carry on living. He describes the way his dad was before taking his life, and like Becky, we see clear parallels between him and Gilbert. Upon that realization, Gilbert knows he has to do something about what he's becoming before losing himself forever. The lovers embrace, this time in a total connection, not hiding from anyone anymore. And we cut to tomorrow. Tomorrow, now today, is Arnie's birthday. Gilbert arrives as a bit of a black sheep, but his attitude change is immediately palpable and dispels any animosity towards him. He knows his fault and is ready to make amends to Arnie, who, as per his usual ritual, is climbing to hide in the tree when he sees him. To reflect his now earnest attitude, Gilbert doesn't feign shock when he sees Arnie emerge from the tree, but he's genuinely happy to see him. He stopped pretending on both facets of this occurrence. The family has a real bonding moment for the first time in the movie, and nobody's feeling bad. Well, almost nobody. Gilbert has one more person to make amends to, his mother. He's been harboring feelings of resentment and embarrassment from her for a long time, but not anymore. The two have a heart-to-heart, and I don't really have much to say about this, it's just a very sweet moment between mother and son. While Tucker babbles on about the foundation problem again, Betty comes by to give Arnie his birthday present and see Gilbert. Upon seeing her, he suggests she meet his mother. This during the whole movie was alluded to as a big step he couldn't overcome, as if his mom was this huge secret, no pun intended this time. Now, however, accepting himself and his family, he's ready to show his whole self to Becky. His mother refuses at first, but for once, Gilbert asks to be prioritized. She capitulates and actually meets Becky. To call their meeting anticlimactic would be too negative. We were so led to believe this would be a huge reveal to Becky that when she greets her just like any other human being in typical Becky fashion, after a few moments of surprise, we're left thinking alongside Gilbert, yeah, how else should it go? It's time for Becky to leave. Just like their first date, one says, "I had a really nice time." The other replies, "I know." This time, though, the roles are reversed. Becky's impact is permanently lodged in Gilbert's heart, and their goodbyes reflect that. There is sadness, of course, but no bitterness, no envy, it's just mostly love, appreciation. Arnie even remarks it in an accidental bout of wisdom.
Thank you.
Goodbye.
No, it's not goodbye, Arnie.
It's good night. Good night. Good night to you, but not me.
As if there weren't enough drastic changes happening, Bonnie Grape, after leaving the house for the first time, now climbs the stairs to her bedroom after 6 years of sleeping in the living room. She calls for her birthday boy, and while on his way, describes Gilbert as her knight in shimmering armor. There is a certain air about her behavior that makes it seem like, after Becky's, it's her goodbye now. And sure enough, when Arnie finally comes to her, he finds that she is gone. Just like that, Gilbert's mother passes away in her bed, proud of her kids and finally at peace. This is a tragedy for any family, and the Grape family is no different, but the kids have what they lacked before when facing grief: each other. They will weather the storm together, but before they can be able to do that, they must shed away the past, their mother, the house. What better manner than to let the fire cleanse it all away, permitting them to rise from the ashes of their past, a total rebirth. The rebirth includes in its similarities with what came before it, but now with the added wisdom only hindsight can bring. 1 year later, Gilbert is still Gilbert, Arnie is still Arnie, and Dora is still Endora, and so are the sisters still the same. 1 year later, however, they are all in charge of their future. Olive Craver finally came to terms with the reality she's been escaping all her married life. Becky discovered that behind every seemingly innocuous existence, there is a complex web of interconnected emotions. Gilbert's family embraced their circumstances and chose to adopt a nonetheless positive view going forward, with their mother finally being able to come face to face with the ghost of her past and facing it head on. On her death, Bonnie Grape was a woman finally at peace. Still, it's clear that the eponymous character of the movie is the one who saw the most evolution. Gilbert went from an apathetic young man of straw, content with living his life on the sidelines, waiting for the train of opportunity that he didn't know only came for those who called on it, to a man ready to take on the world with both hands at the ready. He was still his unassuming self, but now with a fire in him and a love he showed freely to those he cherishes. As the late Earl Nightingale once said, the opposite of courage is conformity, and while once a conformist, Gilbert Grape flipped the switch on his life to become the brave young man he is today. Thus, as one discovers what's eating Gilbert Grape, they can find the thing that's gnawing at them and learn how to deal with it. allowing for a fresh start alongside the Arnies and Beckys of their life. And what a life it could be. Only you decide. This has been Internet Victim, signing off. I love this movie so much. This script has been sitting for maybe before this channel even started. I didn't really want to make a video on it because I was afraid I would hate it from watching and rewatching it during my writing. But I decided I should make a love letter to this amazing film because, I don't know, it gets so little love on the movie video essay field on YouTube. I find it very hard to pull off using comedy, especially this subtly, to convey such profound truths. There are so many scenes I only got to understand during my analysis of the movie. Jokes that totally went over my head because I wasn't watching it as a comedy flick, which it isn't truly. But as with life itself, not taking things at face value helped me perceive new depths to the film that I didn't really see before. I also like how cyclical it is, if you can notice how many times I said again, and like the first time. Even the temporal setting of the movie, the early 70s, somehow has societal events that mirror those happening when the movie came out, as well as now. It's a slow burn, and it might not be for everyone, granted, but it sure as hell is for me, and I do hope it is for you if you count on watching it, which you definitely should. Anyway, I really thank you for watching. This has been a longer than usual video, and well, I'll see you in a few. Goodbye.